Tonight, it's December 2001. A young woman walks out of a nightclub at around 3:45 a.m. in the New South Wales town of Bathurst, steps into a red car and is never seen again. The disappearance and probable murder of 31-year-old Janine Vaughan is one of Australia's more troubling unsolved crimes. But what's also disconcerting about this case is how the investigation by police was derailed. First by an extraordinary campaign of small-town gossip.
Rumours that just grew on rumours.
And then by the Police Integrity Commission, the police watchdog.
The tragedy of it is that such drastically wrong actions have derailed the murder investigation that was on track.
Tonight we'll look at how it all went wrong, almost from the moment Janine Vaughan walked out into the street that rainy night nearly 20 years ago.
I find this quite compelling to see because this is the last time we see her alive.
You sometimes sit at home at night and wonder, what have I missed? Have I missed something I should have seen?
Good evening, I'm Liz Hayes, and this is Under Investigation. Joining me to peel back the layers of this case is former detective Gary Jubilan, a 30-year-plus veteran of the New South Wales Police Force who has seen it all, from the front line of the Tactical Response Group through to high-profile cases like the disappearance of William Tyrrell.
A predator looking to abduct someone and murdered someone, I'd suggest that wouldn't be their first offence.
Former Deputy Commissioner Nick Caldas, one of the highest-ranking police officers in Australia, who has worked for the United Nations and Scotland Yard.
That was very unequivocal. I have to say he's a legitimate suspect.
Professor Richard Kemp, a global expert in forensic psychology and a specialist in understanding eyewitness evidence.
People who engage in stalking behaviour are often very close to the victim.
And Mal Pollard, former owner of the Metro Tavern in Bathurst.
The tavern you owned was called what?
It had been called the Dirty Tav.
And the Stabbin' Tavern. And that was the last place Janine Vaughan was seen alive. Thank you all very much for joining us. I'm going to start with you, Gary Jubilan. What is it about this case?
When there's been a murder or a disappearance in a town like Bathurst, people need answers. And we're now 20 years down the track. When someone's been murdered or disappears in circumstances like this, it's not forgotten.
Yeah, what do you think, Nick?
The whole town, I think, is still looking for answers, trying to work out, is someone among us perhaps responsible for this? Do they walk among us?
Richard, I reckon that's probably what affects a small country town. It's not someone you don't know. It's probably somebody you do know or know someone who knows that person.
Yeah, I think that's what's clear in this case, that it is a small town, and there must also be the haunting fear for people in the community that it's someone close to them.
In 1998, Janine Vaughan moves to the New South Wales country town of Bathurst with her boyfriend, Phil Evans. She's 28, he's 23, an electrician with a steady job. For the couple, it's the beginning of a new life together. And according to Phil and her friends, it's the start of a happy chapter for Janine.
Funny, loud, energetic, loved sports, loved people that loved her.
She was sensitive and a really good friend.
She worked at my sister's sandwich shop.
Janine's time at the shop was fun. She was very diligent, always willing to help.
Janine was just a popular, would love to have a good time, I suppose.
And she'd sit with a cigarette in one hand and her JD in the other with the feet up on the bogey. And basically, you know, just, you could hear her for miles away. She would be laughing and singing. She loved to sing.
Definitely had a lot of friends, yeah, close friends too.
But within 3 short years, the life Janine had hoped for had crumbled. Her relationship with Phil ended. Her days began to turn into long nights of socialising. And in the early hours of a December morning, after a big night out, Janine stepped into a small red car with an unknown driver and disappeared.
And that was the last time she's seen alive.
It is a crime that has haunted Bathurst ever since.
A crime like that in a town like Bathurst is going to leave a lasting effect on that town, and all of the community, I'm sure, share that pain.
At the time of Janine's disappearance, Mal Pollard's Metro Tavern was one of a number of nightclubs in Bathurst with a colourful reputation.
Mal, I don't know how to say this, but the tavern you owned was called what?
The Metro nightclub.
No, and?
No, it had been called the Dirty Tav.
And the Stabbin' Tavern. I'm just trying to get to reality of this place where Janine Vaughan went missing.
Look, I think when you're looking at a murder, you've got to look at the environment in which this person was last seen. So obviously it's relevant to this case because that's where we know that Janine was last seen.
She broke up from her boyfriend. She started going out with a younger crew, if you like.
Yeah.
You know,
And because of that younger crew, just the way that they're going to live their lifestyle, she's going to be out and about and drinking and not at home. So that's the type of thing we look at with victimology. So you look at the person and the way the person lives their life. I think it would be fair to say, and not disrespectful to Janine, at that particular time in her life when she disappeared, it was a rather unsettled period in her life.
On what would be the last night she was seen alive, Janine arrived at the Metro Tavern with her friends Juanita and Jordan. It was the early hours of December 7th, 2001.
At 2:30 she arrived on the CCTV time. She turned up with Jordan and Juanita, and they were there for about an hour and 10 minutes.
Yeah, well, we have that CCTV footage. Should we look at it? And you can explain to us a little of what we're seeing. So, as you can see, we've got Janine's arriving. She's the one on the right.
Yeah, and she's obviously in really good spirits. She's given everyone a stamp.
Right. While Janine was inside having a drink, we know that there was a woman outside who reports that she was approached by a man who tried to entice her into his car. It was a 41-year-old woman, Lynette Borland, and she reports that she was very frightened and she ran to the local service station and very clear about what she had happened to her.
Look, I hold a lot of weight on that being related to Janine's disappearance because the description of the person that was following this woman and trying to get this woman into the car, a male, a large male, a small red car. So I think the weight that you could place on that incident is very high, given the fact that it was reported straight away at the time.
Coming up,
It's this tragedy that you can watch unfolding.
You see a little light go left to right above the time. At 3:52, she gets in.
I find this quite compelling to see because this is the last time we see her alive.
that's next on Under Investigation. The disappearance and probable murder of 31-year-old Janine Vaughan in the New South Wales country town of Bathurst nearly 20 years ago is one of the more disturbing mysteries in Australia's criminal history. To understand the crime, it helps to understand Bathurst. To outsiders, it's a university country town whose peace is broken one weekend a year by the howl of race cars in the Bathurst 1000 on Mount Panorama. But in the 1990s and 2000s, Bathurst had a very dark side of violence, drugs, and a reputation for sexual assaults of young women. One of the toughest bars in town was the Metro Tavern, owned at the time by Mal Pollard.
When we took it over, it had a terrible reputation, and in the first 6 months, we barred 300 people from there. I personally know of 4 rapes in in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of crimes that stood out. Obviously, Janine's one, but there was a young lady coming home from the Metro Tavern, and she was grabbed by a bloke at knife point, dragged in the bushes and raped, a very violent sexual assault. It does leave a feeling about the town that it's a toxic mix where things could happen.
I imagine, Richard, this plays with the psyche of the town.
Yes, I'm sure that's right. And I suspect if you dig a little deeper into any town and any city and any district, you will find a huge undercurrent of unreported sexual violence. That's the terrible truth, that it's going on and not being reported.
I'd like us to hear from a young woman who talked about that time.
We were scared all the time. Girls were raped. I've even heard stories, many stories of, young girls being dragged into cars. I myself got attacked when I was 15. I got stalked and I got a knife put to my throat. The tunnels became a way of me of escaping all that, and I just didn't feel at ease walking around the streets of Bathurst. So the stormwater drains were my little safety net. No one could see me, no one knew I was there. And it was my hiding spot.
Were you aware of those storm tunnels? And were you aware that young women were using them as a way to safely get home or to move about?
No, not at all. It's actually quite a shocking thing to realise that we didn't know that at the time.
It's the early hours of December 7, 2001. Janine Vaughan is ending a long night of drinking at the Metro Tavern in Bathurst, known locally as the Dirty Tab. At the same time, outside, a man in a small red car attempts to convince 41-year-old Lynette Borland to get into his vehicle. Frightened, she runs to a nearby service station and reports the incident to police. Not long after, Janine and her friends Juanita and Jordan leave the tavern.
I find this quite compelling to see because this is the last time we see her alive.
This is the first time this CCTV video of Janine's last moments has been aired in full.
And that's Jordan that comes out, stands and looks and walks away.
Janine stops and then kisses a man named Mark Wright.
Someone asked if it was a peck, but it's sort of
That's not a
6
peck.
or 7 seconds is
Yeah.
not a peck. And when we listen to the audio, when Mark Wright is getting in the taxi,
The man
we don't
she's
know.
kissed.
Yeah, we don't know what was said beforehand, but he says, "Promise." So the assumption is, promise you're coming back to sort of.
Promise means at least something like,
Yeah.
oh, you will see each other again, maybe.
Yeah.
Outside the tavern, Janine seems annoyed by her friends Juanita and Jordan arguing.
Say goodbye, mate. Say goodbye. Say goodbye.
Janine returns and the argument continues.
How can I say this nicely? Is she inebriated?
I think on the balance of probabilities, that's probably the case.
Could answer, Nick.
The sound of her voice, she sounds more inebriated than the actual, her movements. Like she doesn't stagger or stumble and she walks off. And when she does walk off, she's quite determined and sets off at quite a good pace.
The night for Janine has been complicated because she's lost her handbag, not knowing it had been placed out of sight for safekeeping. It would be later argued that was all part of a plot to abduct her.
coincidences occur, you get strange correlations. And I think the trouble is when we're trying to seek an explanation for something, we assume that they must be related. And it can just be that these were two unrelated events.
Yeah, exactly.
It certainly would have had something to do with her state of mind, and not having the keys to the house, she may have been more inclined to get in the car with someone. But it was originally suggested that the handbag was hidden. But when we watched the CCTV, it's not hidden. It's just placed behind the board and then not found at the end of the night.
We hear her. She gets very angry about this bag, and she gets very angry about Juanita, her friend, and Jordan.
Okay. I'm getting more drinks. If I go beyond, I'm getting more drinks. I'll be more.
Frustrated, Janine says she's going back to drink at the Ox nightclub.
I'm going, George. I'm going, George.
From the Metro Tavern, the Ox is just a 5-minute walk away.
And what do you make of it, Gary? She's cut a few drinks. She wants to go on.
Well, the observation I make is that it's a person whose night wasn't over.
I can't even get into my house.
And then you'll see her walking off, and you'll see her, the way in which she uses her arms almost. It's like, well, she's had enough. And very soon afterwards, the car arrives.
Yeah, it's at 3:52. See, there's Jordan and Juanita just going out of shot there, so that's quite a long time behind. In a moment, you just see a little light go left to right above the time and appear to do a U-turn and then pull up behind her, and the door opens and she gets in.
It's this tragedy that you can watch unfolding as all these circumstances fall into place, which are going to end up putting her where she ends the night. It's a terrible, terrible thing to watch.
The car Janine gets into becomes a pivotal piece of the puzzle, and identifying it from CCTV footage was a job given to Newcastle professor John Fryer, an expert in photographic analysis.
I was contacted by the New South Wales Police, Detective Benjamin Hopper, and Ben showed me a video and said, in that video there's a motor car moving from left to right on the top of the screen. Could I enhance that vehicle to see it better, because it's very, very small and hard to see. When looking at the video, at around 3:51 a.m, Janine Mary Vaughan is seen to walk in the frame numbered 2 up George Street towards Keppel Street. She crosses the road and is therefore on the side where the park is. At 3:52, a vehicle comes along Keppel Street. It does a U-turn and, one presumes, picks her up. My research would indicate that it is a small vehicle. It would have a wheelbase somewhere in the range 2.4 to 2.55 metres. It's most likely red, I believe, but could be another colour which reflected the same as red does under those conditions at night.
You're nodding, Richard.
I think it's a pretty impressive piece of work.
The car, and in particular its colour, would become the one and only piece of evidence police have, and dictates the course of the rest of the investigation. Professor Fryer's analysis could not be 100% certain that the car was red, so information from eyewitnesses was critical. There were 4 people who reported they saw a small red car, including Janine's friends Juanita and Jordan, despite their distance from it and the rain.
We've got 2 people following Janine, all saying it's a red car. If those are genuinely 4 independent witnesses who all spontaneously reported that the car was red, then that's a really impressive piece of evidence. However, if they have communicated with each other, and I'm not suggesting anything intentional, if they've talked to each other, if they've been affected by each other's information, then, in fact, having 4 people telling the same thing is not any more impressive than having just one person telling you that thing.
Gary, you've been there.
Yeah.
You walked that territory. Do you think those eyewitnesses can be reliable?
I think so. It's certainly physically possible for them to see the type of detail they described.
The red car seen by witnesses matches the one described by a 41-year-old woman, Lynette Borland, who earlier that same night and near the tavern reported she had been intimidated by a man trying to lure her into his vehicle.
I think that the best evidence is the young woman where there's an attempted abduction, because I think there's good evidence that she went directly to the filling station and reported
100%
the red car. And I think that, you know, we have the most reliable eyewitness evidence is stuff that's reported very quickly, immediately after the event, before forgetting occurs. She spontaneously said it's red. It probably was.
Yeah.
I'm not as sceptical about the colour. Leaving aside the professor's research, I think particularly Ms Borland is very reliable, and I'd be comfortable to say that chances are it was a red car.
Apart from the car's colour, the biggest question that would later drive the police investigation and haunt Janine's family and friends was, did she get into the car willingly? Did she know her killer? Coming up,
The car appears to be stopped for between 25 and 27 seconds.
That tells me there was some conversation took place that convinced her to get in.
But there were 3 persons of interest ultimately in the end.
A very detailed confession.
That added to the investigation in a powerful way as well.
Sure.
that's next on Under Investigation. It's the early hours of December 7, 2001. Janine Vaughan has left Bathurst's Metro Tavern. Somewhere inside, she has lost her handbag. She's intoxicated, frustrated, and it's raining. She leaves, telling her friends Juanita and Jordan that she's going to the Ox nightclub for another drink. What Juanita and Jordan witness next is crucial to the investigation. An approaching red car stops, and after a short conversation, Janine, willingly it seems, gets in.
I think the point that was made, though, that her friends were following her and they thought they were going to the same location, I think is quite powerful. It suggests that they would be paying more attention than your average eyewitness would be.
I don't think there's any doubt about that.
In the years since her disappearance, Janine's family and friends have sworn she must have known the driver.
The family's adamant she would never have gotten into a car, and her friends, she would never have gotten into a car unless she knew the person. And that added to the investigation in a powerful way as well.
Sure. I think it goes towards everything we discussed in relation to her frame of mind, losing her handbag, being cranky, not knowing how she's going to get into her house, not desperate, but it's raining. She's miserable, basically, because of the weather. Swore a little bit before she left the pub. All of that would lead to her perhaps doing something that she may not have normally done. Getting into a car, someone says, get out of the rain, come with me, I'll take you wherever you're going. She hops in.
The car appears to be stopped for between 25 and 27 seconds. If she knew the person and just jumped straight in, then she would know them.
I think Mal should have been a detective. That's very perceptive, seriously. That is a really important point. It wasn't an instant get in the car. There was a gap of perhaps 20, 25 seconds. That tells me there was some conversation took place that convinced her to get in. It wasn't instant.
To our experts, Mal Pollard's analysis of the CCTV tape from the Metro Tavern is new evidence. Whatever was said by the driver of the red car during those 20-odd seconds seemed to convince Janine to get into the car just before 4 a.m. that December night. She is reported missing the following morning when she fails to turn up at work. Bathurst police begin what is initially a missing persons investigation. It's perhaps why a potential murder weapon, a knife, found discarded openly on the driveway of a nursing home just a few days later is never kept as evidence and will eventually be lost.
There was a knife that was handed in a couple of days after Janine was reported having disappeared. This knife apparently had blood and hair on it. It was found a couple of days after the event. It got lost. How does that happen?
Do you want me to take this one, Nick? Or... Thanks very much.
Look, I would say before Gary launches, mistakes happened, and clearly that was a mistake and perhaps a costly one. But police are human beings. The fellow who found it was handed into probably could have done more, and then the system should have allowed for it to have been handled differently, but obviously it wasn't.
I think it's a breakdown of a system that's, and I'm defending the police here, early days in an investigation, and the more difficult it is, and the wider you cast the net, the more information that comes in. It's not making excuses, it's saying a mistake happened.
There were 3 persons of interest ultimately in the end. They might have been not any longer persons of interest if that knife had been found to be used with Janine and none of their DNA was on there.
Well, the unfortunate part is we'll never know. One would assume, I put the homicide investigator's hat on and think, well, if someone's gone to the trouble of abducting someone, disposing of someone's body, but they leave the murder weapon in a public place like that, it doesn't quite equate. But we'll never know.
Right. Well, using the red car as the primary evidence, Bathurst detectives, including an officer named Brad Hosemans, set about investigating, and 2 persons of interest were identified. The first was a local pharmacist, 38-year-old Andrew Jones, a single man who worked in the same shopping complex as Janine Vaughan and who owned a small red car. Their second person of interest was Dennis Briggs, a man with a history of mental illness requiring medication, who also owned a small red car. But Dennis Briggs raised the temperature, if you will, of the investigation when a number of people alleged he confessed to raping and murdering Janine.
Briggs denied ever making the confession, but one of those who claims to have heard Briggs tell his story was a security guard at Mal Pollard's Metro Tavern.
He was security at the hotel, and he's the guy that was sitting on the door in those videos that you saw.
Right, and he had heard of this confession?
Yeah, he actually said that he heard Dennis telling someone, and not with just, yeah, I killed Janine Vaughan. It's a very detailed confession.
When someone confesses, what usually makes them decide to do that?
Well, confession, of course, is a good thing. It's false confession, which is the concern, sometimes because it's an attention-seeking mechanism, and you suddenly become the focus of attention. As I'm sure you know, in all high-profile cases, you get people coming forward and making entirely implausible confessions.
Yeah, I don't understand the science or the reason behind people why they do make false confessions, but I've seen it, and it does occur.
Yes, because he was incredibly detailed. He even stated how many times he stabbed
and that was,
Janine,
to me...
where and...
Yeah, I know. And I also went to the location, is it White Rock, where
Yes.
he said, I went there. Now, that's a double-edged sword too, because it would be a place where you could dispose of a body if you abducted someone from Bathurst, but it also would be if you're making up a story, it sounds believable.
What we do know is that shortly after Janine's disappearance, he detailed his car and changed the seats, sold it, shaved his head.
Shaved his head. And this is delving right out of my area of expertise, but like he's got a mental
Yes.
sort of bipolar, so how that manifests itself.
Well, in fact, I think he said he was off his medication, and he simply says he didn't murder or abduct Janine, and he didn't tell this confession even.
And Dennis Briggs told police anything he may have claimed was due to him being off his medication.
I think we have to be a little dubious about the confession. As we say, there are reasons why people make false confessions, and if you want to tell a good story, it's a great story to tell.
That's the answer.
Yeah, I think that is the answer.
The thing any homicide investigator would look for is details of the murder or the crime scene or the victim that only the murderer would know, and preferably if those details had not been in the media. And we didn't see any of that. There was nothing that he said that had not come out in the media that would tell you that he knew something that only the murderer would know.
Coming up,
There appears to have been an anonymous complaint.
Rumours that just grew on rumours.
Did you know Janine? Well, suddenly they were investigating a policeman and their eyes are taken off the ball in investigating what happened to Janine.
They clearly made a mess of this.
That's next on Under Investigation. Bathurst police struggled to find evidence to help their investigation into the disappearance of Janine Vaughan. One person, Dennis Briggs, became a person of interest when friends claimed he'd confessed to murdering Janine. Briggs, however, denied making any such confessions. But police, still focusing on their one lead, a small red car Janine was seen to get into, found a second person of interest. Well, the second person of interest was Andrew Jones, who owned a small red car and regularly saw Janine as the pharmacist in the same shopping centre where she worked. Jones was also in charge of a dormitory at the co-educational boarding school, Scots College, on the outskirts of Bathurst, where he lived on school grounds, but he also kept an apartment in Bathurst. Gary, you've looked closely at this case.
Yeah.
Can you understand why he is a person of interest?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. I see a number of what I'd call red flags or indicators. Andrew Jones was a 38-year-old man, pharmacist. He chose to reside at a school where he wasn't getting financial benefit. He was getting a meal, and he had to, in payoff for that, had to work with some of the kids at the school, coaching teams and different things. There is information that he also had an apartment in Bathurst, which I find unusual. Why would you have an apartment in Bathurst and then 2 kilometres away live at a school with 38 years of age?
Escape the kids?
To escape
Well,
the kids? Okay, but reasonable assumption. Why doesn't he just live in town then? Other things about Andrew Jones of interest to me. First time he spoke to police was a matter of weeks after the investigation. And my understanding is the report, it was a local police officer, and the report was that he was cooperative, nothing of concern here, and basically satisfied everything. And it also said in the document that his car was searched. Then I think it was 4 weeks after Janine's disappearance, he was spoken to by homicide detectives. Then the situation changed, that he was asked to provide DNA, which he declined to do, which is his right. They asked to search his car, which he declined, and which is his right again, and to take a photo. On the night Janine disappeared, he said he was round seeing his minister. He was a religious man and spent a couple of hours there, then went home. He has no one that can corroborate that he was at home at the school the whole time, and he can't remember what he did the next day because he had that day off. So all those things, I'm interested in why someone that's clearly, supportive of the fact that if this girl has been abducted, we want to solve it. Why he chose not to have his DNA taken and photo and car search.
He might have been starting to feel uncomfortable, like, hang on, I'm getting a bit of undue attention here.
Most definitely, and I can understand that. But we're talking about the crime and abduction of a girl that, surely that will help the police find it because they won't waste time looking at me.
Andrew Jones was a member of his local Anglican community, and his pastor, David Coy, saw Jones on the night of Janine's disappearance. I'd like you to listen to his pastor, the man who vouches for him, David Coy.
Some people might say that Andrew was awkward. Lots of us are awkward in different sorts of ways, and being awkward is not a criminal offence. The sort of person who might do that kind of evil, and it really seems to have been an incredibly wicked thing that's happened to Janine Vaughan. They can't cover up who they are.
That was very unequivocal. Perhaps not what I thought I was going to hear.
What were you expecting?
If he was going to defend him, to say, I just don't think it's him. I don't think he's capable of doing something like this, and I know him well. I didn't get that. I have to say he's a legitimate suspect.
Andrew Jones has always strenuously denied having anything to do with Janine's disappearance. But while police identified him and Dennis Briggs as persons of interest in the case, small-town gossip soon had police looking at a new suspect.
Did you know Janine?
The former Deputy Mayor of Bathurst, Brad Hosemans, who was also a senior detective involved in the investigation, became a third person of interest.
At the start, there was no mention of Brad Hosemans, but 3 or 4 months into the investigation, the rumours started to appear, and it all started from one particular taxi driver who repeated ad nauseum to all his customers, like everyone that got in the cab. And I know 10 or 12 people personally that he told. And he told them that Brad was seen talking to Janine in the minutes before she disappeared. Now, it's just not true. You've seen the video. There's only 4 people approach her. None of them are Brad Hosemans. Brad Hosemans is nowhere to be seen.
Town suspicions grew partly because Detective Hosemans was charged after an incident of alleged sexual assault at a party at the Bathurst Golf Club. Hosemans was found not guilty, but a reputation as a ladies' man lingered. He did not own a red car, and there was no evidence of any kind that Brad Hosemans had a romantic interest in Janine. But still, the rumours of his involvement in her disappearance spread through the town.
Till a few people, and it moved out and out and out and out, until suddenly the rumours became Brad's mum had a red car, Brad's mum's car was burnt out. Neither of those things are true either. And from there, it became Brad sent the flowers, Brad sent the chocolates, and there's been no real evidence of those things.
Yeah. In the absence of answers, that is where it's fertile ground for the imagination.
Yep. And I think nature abhors a vacuum. So where there is a gap in information, real information, sometimes people make it up.
I think that is the nature of conspiracy theories, that they're believed despite the evidence, aren't they? And as I say, I think because they serve a purpose. It helps explain what is otherwise a very distressing situation, that a member of your community has been murdered, appalling circumstances, and yet you can't find the solution. Well, here's something that explains that.
There was not any shred of evidence, was there? And there was a thorough investigation as to whether he had any contact.
That's the point, Liz. Regardless of whether they're rumours or not, that's clearly a line of investigation that would have to be followed up and followed up thoroughly. Now, despite that extensive investigation conducted specifically on that line of inquiry, no evidence was forthcoming, and I think that's very telling. I think we can sit comfortably with the fact that, as Mal pointed out, it's rumours that just grew on rumours.
I think one explanation of what's going on here is that he's a convenient suspect. His possible involvement explains a failure for the investigation to have advanced any further, and so he's a good suspect, and so then I think once people have him in mind, it would be very easy to start to misremember things and to incorporate details into their memories, which just didn't occur.
Coming up.
There's no closure. The body's never been found.
OK, now you've started me, Liz. This is the sad part about what happens here.
They seem legit, but it's just frightening.
They're preying on vulnerable people.
A terrible, terrible situation.
That's next on Under Investigation. The police investigation into Janine Vaughan's disappearance in 2001 drags on for 4 years without an arrest. Senior Bathurst detective Brad Hosemans is investigated and cleared of any involvement in the crime.
Did you know Janine?
But with his reputation in tatters, he leaves the police force in 2003. In June 2005, an anonymous letter is sent to police, again alleging Hosemans' guilt.
It appears to have been an anonymous complaint alleging that Brad Hosemans had committed the murder and that police were covering it up, essentially.
Remarkably, the Police Integrity Commission, the police watchdog body, took the anonymous complaint seriously and launched an investigation.
This hearing is concerned with aspects of the police investigation.
The Commission held public hearings, putting Bathurst Police under the spotlight and distracting from the murder investigation.
Regrettably, they became convinced that there was some truth to that allegation. They decided to background brief the media. They decided to hold public hearings and they advertised them quite widely. And off they went from there. Now, a town the size of Bathurst, to drag all this stuff, a lot of it was unsubstantiated allegations into the open before they'd actually checked that it was true or not. Predictably, it fell over when they had the hearings.
Well, suddenly they were investigating a policeman and their eyes are presumably taken off the ball in investigating what happened to Janine.
I agree with you 100%.
Perhaps the most indefensible act by the Police Integrity Commission was accepting the testimony of a protected witness named RA1, who came forward 5 years after Janine's disappearance. RA1 gave bombshell evidence claiming she'd seen Janine held hostage and highly distressed in a small red car driven by Brad Hoseman's. 5 years later, it took to give that evidence.
Yeah. The most cursory check of this would have blown it out. I'm not casting aspersions much about the proficiency of investigators at the Police Integrity Commission, but they clearly made a mess of this.
The witness, RA1, claimed to be able to identify the red car because it was the same model as her son's. Unfortunately, and to the embarrassment of the Commission, the witness's alleged sighting was made months before her son bought his car. You said an interesting thing. You said people come to believe their lies, but yet they still know they're lying.
If people repeatedly tell a lie, they do believe that that account is more plausible than they did before they started engaging in that lie, but yet they also ultimately know they may not be telling the truth.
After nearly 6 months, the Police Integrity Commission hearings concluded in November 2006. Its findings were damning of the police investigation and made a number of recommendations, including sacking the then head of the homicide squad, Paul Jacobs. But those findings would later be heavily criticised by both the then Police Commissioner, Andrew Scipione, and the Commission's own inspector, Peter Moss QC, who was particularly scathing in his assessment. In the end, the police investigation into Janine's murder had been totally distracted, and the town's former deputy mayor and former detective Brad Hoseman's had left town for good.
Unfortunately, the Police Integrity Commission declined to apologise or to retract their findings or anything else, but the damage that was done both to Hoseman's and the police who were involved in the matter is incalculable. You can't fix it.
But this swallowed up an enormous amount of time and money, resources. I mean, and where was this investigation into Janine?
Well, I mean, this is the tragedy of it, is that such drastically wrong actions by a government department have derailed the murder investigation that was on track and was hopefully going somewhere. Apart from the damage to the individuals, I feel for the victim's family and all her loved ones, because they've had to put up with all these allegations. The fact that there's no closure, the fact that the body's never been found.
I can understand also that the family has gone away going, well, I don't believe anyone anymore. That's what the family must almost be saying.
I think the family have totally lost faith in everybody, not just the police, in the witnesses, in the people that have tried to help them. They've alienated themselves to a certain extent from a number of people that have tried to help them. I mean, I've witnessed it firsthand.
Well, can I come to the family? They clearly feel they have to conduct their own investigations. A member of the family posted this just recently. It's a very clear question. It's Adam Vaughan. It's Janine's brother. It says, Mr. Hoseman's, please tell us where you were the night of the 6th and the morning of the 7th of December. Once and for all, clear your name.
I don't know how many times someone can be cleared.
I also understand that he's obviously in pain, and that's what he's lashing out. And
He's grieving. He's seriously grieving.
While family and friends continue to ask questions about who they fear has taken Janine, the investigation has failed to move very far forward. It does, though, attract self-styled psychics who often involve themselves in unsolved cases.
This is the sad part about what happens here is they're preying on vulnerable people. I've seen too many murder investigations where the bodies haven't been recovered and people like that ingratiate themselves in the investigation, and it plays havoc that the parents or the loved ones go out and will actually be digging around there. In my experience in homicide, I've never had a psychic that's helped solve a crime. Other than that, I haven't got a real strong view.
I had someone contact me on Facebook on the Help Find Janine Vaughan page and ask me a series of questions, and I was prepared to help them. And then later on they tell me, oh, I'm a psychic working with Janine's family. So suddenly they've got all this detail that I've given them that they can go to the family and say, oh yeah, this and this happened. So they seem legit, but it's just frightening.
In general, I try and see the best in people and try and assume that they're being helpful.
And that's what I love about you, Richard.
And I have to say the psychics push me to the limits on that one. There's some research on people who take this kind of approach. As you say, they collect information. They're very good at picking up all sorts of subtle cues from other people and things they're told. And there have been some studies of looking at whether they can contribute to solving cases, and the answer is they can't. It's as simple as that.
If you were a member of Janine Vaughan's family, all of this is nearly 20 years, and this has just been going on and on and on. How do they deal with that?
I can't imagine. A terrible, terrible situation. The uncertainty, the doubt, and particularly the suspicion of people living in your community, people you might know personally might be responsible. That must be terrible to deal with. Thank goodness I cannot imagine how awful that is. I feel very deeply for them.
Nearly 20 years on, Janine Vaughan's case remains unsolved. It was always believed she would only have stepped into the mysterious red car outside the Metro Tavern with someone she knew. But our analysis of the CCTV video shows that maybe that wasn't true, and perhaps a stranger did convince her to get in.
The car appears to be stopped for between 25 and 27 seconds.
That tells me there was some conversation took place that convinced her to get in. It wasn't instant.
We know Janine was not the first woman targeted that night. A little earlier, another woman, Lynette Borland, reported she too was approached near the tavern by a man in a red car.
Look, I hold a lot of weight on that being related to Janine's disappearance.
Unfortunately, Lynette Borland died without ever identifying the driver that night. There still remains only two persons of interest in Janine's disappearance: local pharmacist Andrew Jones and Dennis Briggs, who allegedly confessed to Janine's rape and murder.
It's a very detailed confession.
But Briggs, who suffered a mental illness, has always denied making any confession. And despite being persons of interest, there is simply not enough evidence to suggest that either Jones or Briggs were involved in Janine's disappearance. Perhaps any hope police had in cracking the case was dashed after the public hearings held by the Police Integrity Commission, which might have destroyed the community's confidence in the investigation team.
Such drastically wrong actions have derailed the murder investigation that was on track.
Two years ago, a $1 million reward was offered for information to solve the case. It's hoped that after hearing our experts tonight, someone, somewhere, still holding a 20-year secret will come forward.
You sometimes sit at home at night and wonder, what sort of person and what have I missed? Have I missed something I should have seen?
What should we take from this particular case?
It's terrible what's happened to Janine Vaughan. It's terrible that her family are going through this dreadful grief. Absolutely sympathise with that. And those who are propelling those conspiracy theories, whether it's psychics or otherwise, it's been said before, it's incredibly selfish. They're looking for their own self-aggrandisement, and they're preying on vulnerable, grieving families who have every reason to want closure for the death of their loved one.
I can imagine the day when this case is resolved. I mean, the impact on Bathurst.
I mean, it'll be a massive relief. Just to know that a person's been caught and punished and that Janine's family, like I said, may not be closure, but we'll get some answers.
Here I am, waiting for you.
So thank you very much for joining me here this evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Liz Hayes. Good night. Hello, I'm Liz Hayes. Thanks for watching our brand new event series, Under Investigation. Subscribe to our channel now for more great stories from both Under Investigation and 60 Minutes Australia. For other exclusive Under Investigation content, visit 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.